Hi everyone, welcome to this presentation, Electricity 2.0. A lot of my thunder has been stolen already. Alex Stefan and Gavin Starks yesterday used most of my slide deck, so I've had to reconfigure the slide deck accordingly. If you were at those talks, ignore the first 400 slides in this presentation. I have a long presentation, I have about 60 slides. I will be going through them at a bit of a clip. To that end, I hope to get some time in at the end for Q&A. If not, my contact details are on the screen there. Please do get in touch if you have anything you want to follow up with. I'll also be hanging around at the end. I'll be here for the next day or so. So again, if we don't get a chance in the Q&A officially, do come up to me. My Twitter ID is there as well, twitter.com/TomRaftery, because I have no imagination. So if you want to tweet, get in contact, follow me, please feel free. So the background to this talk, I'm starting off with a telecoms image. This is Alexander Graham Bell, the inventor of the telephone. And this is him with one of his very first, very early telephones back in around 1876 or so. And if we were to put Alexander Graham Bell in front of any of these babies today, were he to even recognize them as telephones, I think he'd have a very difficult time figuring out how to use them. This is Thomas Edison, widely credited with the invention of the light bulb. In fact, he didn't invent the light bulb. He perfected the invention and made it a commercial viable product. But having done that, he then decided, well, it might be a good idea, having invented the light bulb, if I now also invented a way to get electricity to that light bulb. So the next thing he invented was the method of distributing electricity. Back in 1882, he came up with the electricity grid. If we were to put him in front of today's electricity grid, he'd recognize it instantly because it's changed hardly a jot since then. And that's a big problem, and it's a result of chronic underfunding and underinvestment in the electricity grids, which has massive knock-on consequences. The average age of an electricity transformer in Europe right now is 42 years. The expected lifetime of those transformers when they were deployed was 40 years. And the situation in the US, as far as I know, is not much better. So the electrical grids right now are creaking and groaning. What we call electricity 1.0 is basically a series of LANs which are somewhat interconnected. It's not like the resilience and the big network that you're familiar with the internet. Far from it. It's more like a series of LANs. You can have situations, crazy situations, in places like West Texas, where you have massive wind farms pumping out, megawatts and megawatts and megawatts of electricity, and neighboring counties having rolling brownouts because they don't have enough power, because the two are not connected. So it's a ridiculous situation. Electricity 1.0 is read-only. You have a very hard time, if you're generating your own electricity, publishing it onto the grid. It's very top-down. It's very buggy, as we all know. It's dumb. And by dumb, I mean it's incredibly dumb. The grid is so dumb, in fact, that if there is a brownout, if there is a blackout somewhere, and the blackout's a result of a line breakage, be it someone digging up a cable, be it a tree falling over, a transformer blowing up, any of these things, the first the utility company hears about it is when their phones start ringing with people saying, "Where's my electricity gone?" Then they isolate it based on where the phone calls are coming from. Then they send repair crews out to try and find where it is and what it is, and then they send the guys to fix it when they do finally find the problem. It's a closed system. Just you go out and try and set up a utility, and you'll find out for yourself exactly how closed it is. It'll be 5 years' time before you finish reading all the regulations. It's a system which is architected for the past. It's a system which is architected for a very few large suppliers, the large generation facilities, who are controllable and predictable, and they're supplying into a demand situation where the demand is variable but also predictable. That situation is changing enormously now with microgeneration and renewables coming on board, and that's causing huge problems for the utilities. The utilities at the moment provision for HITs. This is a kettle, for those of you who are not familiar with a kettle. Kettle is for boiling water for making tea. In the UK, mostly is where these things are used. And there's a situation which arises in the UK where at the end of this very popular television program called EastEnders, ends around 8 o'clock UK time, everyone gets up, puts on the kettle, goes out to the toilet, flushes the toilet, and you get this massive spike of demand for electricity. Somewhat similar to this kind of situation. This is an Alexa graph of traffic to the AustralianOpen.com website, but you get the idea. You get this massive spike in demand, and of course, the utility company has to provision for that, so they have to have generation facilities to hit the top of that peak, or else they hit a rolling brownout or a blackout situation. So, you then get the spectre, the bogeyman situation of renewable energy coming on the scene. And the utility companies really don't like renewables. They don't like renewables because they are nice and comfortable where they are right now, and the renewables are an uncontrollable, typically variable, unpredictable to a large extent, generation source. The wind blows, the wind drops, the generation goes up and down, they can't control it, it completely destabilizes their grid. This is a chart taken from the grid operator in Spain. I happen to live in Spain. And it's hard to make out from that graph, but the large green band, the second one down, so that the lighter green band, is the band of wind energy on the Spanish grid at this point in time. This is across 24 hours. And where the little white box is, you can't read it there, I suspect, but it's 10.182 gigawatts of power being generated by wind at that point in time, and that's coming in at 42.4% of the demand. So 42.4% of the national demand in Spain for electricity at that point in time was being generated by wind. Now, I don't know how much you know about Spain, but it's quite a sunny country. Quite a warm country. Lovely place to live, let me tell you. There is no bar, or there's no separate chart, or no separate line on this chart for solar. The reason for that is because, despite Spain being such a sunny country, solar hasn't penetrated there because it's not economic yet. It's getting there. Right now, Spain has about 15 gigawatts of installed wind, with an aim of getting to 20 by next year. They have 400 megawatts of solar. So while people are talking up solar all the time, and it's great, it really is great, it's still quite expensive, and it hasn't hit mainstream yet the way wind has. So the majority of renewable that we talk about is still wind. Wind has problems. This is off the Irish grid operator. I am Irish. And you can see from these two graphs of wind supply versus energy demand that the supply from wind and the demand from us are typically almost exactly out of phase. Not as much as this always, but this just gives you an idea of how out of phase they can be. Some numbers, just to put it in context, from 2006. In 2006 in Ireland, the wind penetration was 6.5% average over the year. There were times, like early in the morning, like 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, when demand was low, so the demand was 1.8 gigawatts. At that time, if there was a wind blowing across the country, supply from wind could be coming in at nearly 50%. That's at a 6.5% average. At times, it could come in at 50%. That's important because the Irish government has committed to moving from that 6.5% to 40% by 2020, 40% average. Now, think again of that early morning, 2, 3 a.m., when at 6.5% average, you were getting 50% supplied by wind. That 6.5% has now gone to 40%, so that 50% is going to go to 300%. 300%. What do you do with an extra 200% of power? It comes in around 3 gigawatts. Ireland is an island with no offshore interconnect. You can't put it in a box and stick it in a shelf. There are exotic storage solutions being talked about. And this isn't just an Irish problem. This is, I'm using that as an example because it's one I happen to know. There are exotic storage solutions being tried out. This one is called compressed air storage. The idea being that at times of excess supply of electricity, you pump air into large limestone caverns underground. It's held in the caverns until you have an increased demand. You release it, spin it through turbines, and off you go. You're getting extra supply. There are a number of problems with this. First of all, it's theoretical. There's a couple of pilot projects being tried in Ireland and Germany. It's also expensive, and you need particular geographies. You need places with large underground limestone caverns. There's another solution, which is not that exotic. It's called pumped hydro storage, and same kind of idea, except in this case, you pump water uphill. You require 2 large lakes to do this with a height difference between them. There's one of these in Ireland. It holds about 200 megawatt hours. It cost 20 million Irish pounds to build. It took 5 years to build between 1968 and 73. To rebuild it today would be in the billions of pounds or euros. So expensive and requires particular geographies. Some part of the solution goes some of the way, will hold 200 to 300 megawatt hours, but that's not much if you've got 3 gigawatts to spare. Which leads to situations like this. This is a situation where there was an oversupply of energy in the Irish market last August, and the grid operators, what do? They shut off the wind farms. They lost about 600 megawatt hours, causing an extra displacement of about 100 tons of CO2 during that interval, at a cost of about 40,000 euros to the wind farm owners. Why did they shut down the wind farms and not coal or not gas or one of the others? Wind farms are easy to shut down. There's no startup and shutdown costs associated with them. This isn't an Irish phenomenon. This happens in West Texas, and also you can see here, this is a headline from the New York Times talking about it happening on the Maple Ridge wind farms. This is not unique. This happens. This is not a situation you want to have happening. You don't want wind farms being shut down in favor of non-renewables. The current scenario that we have, we've got a number of change agents coming on the scene, which are forcing this situation to change. The first is the spectre of climate change. London is a particularly low-lying city. This is an image I picked up off Flickr of a couple of scuba divers scuba diving around what was London. This isn't going to happen, we hope, but climate change is coming. It's something that we're all acutely aware of. And there will be flooding, as there will be lots of other knock-on effects. And this is very much in the front of people's minds now. Thankfully, it's taken a long time to get there. Another phenomenal climate change has been the ascension of Barack Obama to the presidency. He has promised in the stimulus plan $11 billion for smart grid infrastructure rollout. So all extremely positive stuff. Barack Obama, in his Audacity of Hope book, in the introduction of that, said 2 things which really amazed me. The book was published in 2006, so it was written in 2005, say. In the introduction to that, he said, there are too many lawyers and not enough engineers in America. Now, that's a hell of a statement from the former editor of the Harvard Law Review. The other thing he said, which amazed me, was he said, I'm a believer in climate change. So to say that from a politician in 2005 was pretty brave, pretty out there. So what kind of solutions have we got for dealing with these kind of situations? This is an image taken off a site called Desert Tech, and it talks of making a super interconnected grid. It's an ongoing project, making a super interconnected, highly resilient grid of electricity across Middle East, North Africa, and Europe, right up as far as Iceland. The transmission lines would be high voltage DC, which are significantly better at transmitting over long distances without loss as opposed to AC lines. You have the blue dots represent wind, the yellow dots represent solar, you've got photovoltaic, you've got geothermal, etc., all interconnected so that if the wind drops in one part, it'll be picked up in another part. The wind is always blowing somewhere. If the sun isn't shining or it's cloudy, you can pull in geothermal, which is kind of like base load, or you can pull in wind from somewhere else. You pass it all around. You start to get a system which is a lot more resilient, a lot less likely to fluctuate. You deploy smart grid. And the smart grid potential, according to the Climate Group's 2020 report, is an interesting one. They say that globally, the smart grids could reduce 2.03 gigatons CO2 emitted, worth 79 billion euros, $124.6 billion. So we're talking significant savings here, both in terms of CO2 and in terms of money. It's not enough to deploy smart grids, though. You have to use market forces to try and get the change we need. So I drive a Prius, and it has absolutely changed the way I drive because it delivers to me the information about the consumption of energy. When I put the foot down, the miles per gallon shoots up. As I ease off, it drops back down. So I have little competitions with myself when I'm going on regular runs in the car to see just how low I can get the fuel consumption. There's a thing called hypermiling. There are websites out there dedicated to it, telling you how to reduce your consumption. Sorry, smart grid. Oh, yeah, Oracle had a report out earlier this week. I have the slide in the wrong order, sorry about that. 95% of Americans are interested in receiving detailed information on their energy use. So people are interested in getting this kind of information. And what people are not aware of, a lot of the time you'll find, is that, and this needs to be exposed to people, is that there are massive fluctuations in the wholesale price of electricity. This again comes from the Irish grid. And you can see the price of electricity there, it's in euros per megawatt hour over 3 days. And the variability goes from 400 euros per megawatt hour, which is 40 cents per kilowatt hour, down to about 40 euro per megawatt hour. So there's an order of magnitude difference in pricing. And that's all based on supply and demand. If there's increased supply, reduced demand, price drops down to 40 euro per megawatt hour or lower, which is about 4 cents per kilowatt hour, and it can shoot up to, on that graph, it can shoot up to 40 cents per kilowatt hour. It's gone a lot higher. We need to TiVoize our energy use. We need to load shift. It's all highly, highly possible to do. You start moving your demand for electricity to times when electricity is cheap. You have that pricing information exposed to you through smart grids. You start to automate the process. It's not just that you see the real-time information, but you have your devices in your house subscribing to pricing information and modifying their behavior according to real-time pricing signals. It's not just for peak shaving. It's not just for trying to reduce those peaks. And reducing the peaks is very important because, as I said, the utility companies have to build extra power plants to meet the tops of those peaks, which might only be used 5 or 6% of the year. You want to get those peaks down, get those inefficient generation facilities off the grid, get them shut down completely. You also want, and not a lot of people talk about this, you want demand stimulation at times. So that 2, 3 a.m. in the morning I talked about, where you have an excess of energy, you actually want people to be using electricity then. You want to increase their demand. And how do you do that? Well, you drop the price. Moving forward, as renewables penetrate the grid more and more, there will be times when electricity will be negatively priced. You will be paid to consume electricity. It's happened already in Western Australia. It's happened a couple of times in France. This is not science fiction. This is fact. Electricity, there will be times when you will be paid to consume electricity. We're moving from a current situation of push to pull, very much mirroring the internet phenomenon. We're also heading into what we're calling the read-write grid. That's where you have solar panels on your roof, you have a wind turbine, and you're generating your own electricity, but at times you have an excess, so you can then sell that back to the grid. Failing that, you store it in batteries or use it to power other devices in your house that you wouldn't normally. A quick shameless plug. I discovered via a site called Jenny.com, which is a genealogical website, going off on a quick tangent. Turns out I have 3 cousins living in Redwood City. First cousins. Didn't know this. They're my father's sister's kids. I'm Irish, big families, etc., etc. I have about 100 first cousins. One of them has an electrical contractor's business in Redwood City. He does solar installations. Archibald Electric. He was telling me last night over dinner, and something that hadn't occurred to me, is that solar photovoltaic is probably one of the cheapest renewables because there are no moving parts. Unlike solar thermal, unlike wind turbines, there are no moving parts. This is important because it requires far, far less maintenance. So over the lifetime, it's a far cheaper investment. Back to the presentation. Vehicle to grid is a very interesting one that's going to be coming more and more on stream with the advent of electric vehicles. So a vehicle to grid is where you have your electric car taking in power from the grid, subscribing to pricing information so that it takes in the energy at times when energy is cheap, or better again, negatively priced. So you're paid to charge your car. Then during the day, when electricity is expensive, you have an option of selling electricity back to the grid. This is hugely, hugely important because if there is a large fleet of electric vehicles out there, you suddenly have solved a considerable amount of the storage problem I referred to earlier. You have a large distributed battery bank for the country. The car on the screen here is from a company called Better Place. Tim referred to them in his keynote opening up at the start of this event. Better Place have a very, very interesting business case that they don't talk about that openly. They've seen, because they will own the batteries in the cars. That's their business model, they'll own the batteries. They've seen that all the batteries that they own will become like a virtual power plant. So they can start to become day traders in energy, buying energy when it's cheap, selling it back when it's expensive. So they will become another power plant and use the cars as a means of being that power plant. Eric Schmidt from Google has said, I could imagine a smart garage where I could plug in my car and the computer handles it, could make money by cost shifting, solves energy security, prices, job creation, and helps out with climate change. Who are the enablers doing this at the moment? The people who are enabling the utilities are these guys, the usual suspects, the IBMs, Oracles, HPs, SAPs, etc. On the consumer front, though, there's a couple of interesting players, and there's room for a lot more. There's Concert out of North Carolina, there's Greenbox, there's Tendril, there's Gridpoint, and these companies all have created what are called home energy networks. So what they do is they sell to the utilities, and the utilities get this home area network that is rolled out to their consumers, so that if my utility buys one of these solutions, I get a home area network that I can come in and see pretty much. Some of them have more granular solutions than others, but you can start to see the electrical consumption of your devices. That's all good. Google is doing something similar, except they're not going through the utility that's direct to the consumer, which is a better model to my mind. There's a lot of grassroots work going on in this area, and this is where it starts to get really interesting. So this is the web page of HomeCamp. HomeCamp is an unconference in the UK. The first HomeCamp was last November, I think it was. I can't see the date there. It was around last October, last November. Great event, a lot of stuff online, a lot of video online about it. There's another one coming up in April. And the home camps are where people who hack home area networks get together and swap stories and swap technologies. This is one of the devices that has emerged out of the UK in this. It's called a current cost. I haven't got the URL there, but if you want to look up current cost, they're at currentcost.co.uk. This device measures your energy consumption, and it can be quite granular. It can produce outputs like this. You can hook it up to computers and publish from it. So a graph like this, you can see a lot of little mini peaks. Those mini peaks would typically be something like a fridge coming on. The compressor in the fridge coming on every 15 minutes during the day. The spike at the end is the oven coming on. I was talking to a woman called Monica Sturm last October. Monica works for Siemens. She's the director of their Center of Competence for metering services. So basically, it's their research arm dedicated to making smart meters. And one of the things Monica said to me in a throwaway comment, which really struck me, was that you can look at the output from smart meters. And this isn't output from a smart meter. This is a cheap device. The current cost is something like £25 or less. The smart meters, the output from them is far more detailed. She said, you can look at the output from a smart meter, and you can tell, oh, look, Tom's got a Philips 32-inch LCD display, and he turns it on between 7 in the evening and 11, typically. He's got an AEG fridge, and oh, look, the compressor needs a bit of work. It's time for a service. Every device you have has got a unique energy footprint. There are going to be issues around that come up when this information starts to be published by your smart meter. Who owns that data? Obviously, we would say it's our data, but the utilities are going to turn around and say, hang on a sec, that's our data. So that's a battle that has yet to be fought, and it's one that Gavin Starks addressed yesterday in his talk about energy identities. The hacking of those devices, the current cost meter, people who are doing that are outputting to things like smartphones, so you can start to see your energy consumption on your phone. Again, this is from Gavin Stark's Amy site. They're taking that information from a current cost, pumping it through RSS, converting it to CO2 and publishing it in real time. Andy Stark is an IBM master inventor working out of Hursley, again in the UK, and he's hacked his whole house, and his whole house tweets. It does things like it says, you know, reduce power consumption. When the phone rings, it tweets. When the lights go on or off, they tweet. When the phone rings, it says whether it's the landline or the mobile. When the kiln goes on in his shed, it tweets. He's got all kinds of things in the house tweeting. So all this stuff is hackable. He's also gone a step further now, and he's produced this. This is a nice chart, and he's only produced it 2 days ago, so this is quite new. He hasn't blogged it yet, but the blog post about the production of this will show up on the URL at the bottom there, 8bar.co.uk, sometime in the next 60 minutes, if it's not there already. This graph is outputting the consumption of various devices in terms of the percentage and also in terms of the amount of watt hours and the price thereof. So he's starting to get very granular information out of his devices. So what? Well, What if, I could get this thing to work, what if our devices in our houses could subscribe to pricing information? And what if those devices could modify their behavior in real time as they got pricing signals from the grid? What if, when electricity was expensive, your fridge decided, okay, electricity is expensive, I'm going to change the thermostat so I burn less electricity. When electricity got cheap, it puts the thermostat the other direction, sucks in energy to chill everything. It's well insulated, so when electricity does become expensive, it can let the thermostat go back up again. What if your hot water immersion heater did the same thing in reverse? Sucked in energy when it was cheap to boil the water, and then changed the thermostat setting automatically, dynamically, when electricity became expensive? What if your dishwashers, your dryers came on when electricity was cheap? You have a simple bit of logic which says to them, come on automatically sometime between now and 6 a.m. Either if you haven't come on by 5 a.m., come on then because I need the stuff ready at 7. What if we took the output of the likes of Andy's software, piped it through Amy to turn it into CO2, piped that CO2 information to Facebook? So now you're publishing, well, Facebook or another social network, just an example. What if everyone were publishing their carbon information? Do you want to be the person in your social network with the highest carbon footprint? Do you want to have competitions among your buddies to see who can drive down your carbon footprint to the lowest? Who's going to be the carbon hero in your group? What if your smart meter were grid neutral? In other words, what if your home energy network could go out through your smart meter and poll all the utilities and dynamically pull in electricity from the utility that's giving you the cheapest electricity at any point in time? What if the utilities published not just pricing information in real time, but their generation mix in real time as well? Then your home area network could go out through your net neutral smart meter and say, I want to take from this provider now, because this provider's got the cheapest, greenest electricity. There's a myth out there that I want to burst, and it's quite counterintuitive. The myth is that renewable energy is expensive. It's not true. In fact, on the wholesale markets, the cheapest electricity is the one with the highest renewable content. Now that's massively counterintuitive. Why is that? It's because the renewables on a market system are price takers. They bid in at 0. They'll take any price. Remember, there's no startup cost. They'll bid in at any price. They'll take whatever price they're given. Whereas the more expensive, the non-renewables don't want to come into the system unless they're getting enough money to fire up their systems. So the non-renewables come in at 5 cents per kilowatt hour, 6 cents per kilowatt hour, 7 cents, whatever, 10 cents. The dirtier ones come in at higher. So cheap electricity, if you're going for cheaper electricity, you're actually selecting for greener electricity. Why is this important? Well, the IPCC climate change report said, and we've all seen these kind of things, if the temperature exceeds 3.5 degrees, model projections suggest 40 to 70% of species around the globe will go extinct. Why is this critical? Well, the chair of the IPCC, Rajendra Pachauri, said if there's no action before 2012, it's too late. What we do in the next few years changes everything. This is our defining moment. One thing to realize about Rajendra Pachauri, He was appointed as head of the IPCC by George Bush. He took over. He was appointed by George Bush because the previous incumbent was deemed to be too alarmist by the Bush administration. This is the conservative viewpoint. Thanks. We have a few minutes for questions if anyone has any. Over here.
You mentioned that DC power was more efficient for is that a special kind of DC power?
High voltage DC is very efficient at moving electricity over long distances. So high voltage DC cables, that technology is being developed now to move electricity longer distances with less losses. Yep.
Could you give a little bit more color to the idea that I'd be paid for using electricity during off-peak?
Sure. So how does that work? Well, it goes back to the point I was making earlier that at times there'll be an excess of electricity. At times, the wind farms are pumping out more electricity than there is a demand for. So you want to stimulate demand. You want people to start taking that electricity because, like I said, you can't put it in a box and stick it on a shelf. You don't want to be shutting down the wind farms. So why not pay people to use it? By doing that, you increase the demand at the time, but you also, if people are doing load shifting, you get them consuming electricity at times that they normally wouldn't, and not then consuming that electricity at times when everyone else wants it as well. So you're doing two things. You're reducing the peak as well. You're leveling the load.
Any thought on the landlord problem?
Sorry?
Any thought on the landlord problem?
I didn't get that.
The landlord problem? My landlord buys my stove, my washing machine, all my stuff. So he's going to buy the cheapest stuff, not all this expensive stuff.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about the appliances in the house and the fact that they're not rated well, and it's not in your landlord's financial interest to invest in energy efficient devices?
Because they're cheap.
Because they're cheap.
I pay the bill, he buys the appliances.
Okay, that's a tough one. Yeah, that's a good point. So it's not in your landlord's interest to drop your prices. Yeah, I don't have an answer for that right now. I'll have to think about it. Anybody else? Ida.
Do you have any data on how sensitive consumers are to seeing their or other consumers' CO2 data? I mean, do they even understand I'm creating this many tons and that's really bad? And how aware are consumers?
How aware are consumers? I don't think consumers are very aware right now. I mean, if I say to you, you're burning a ton of carbon by doing something, that's very difficult to visualize. There is a big communication problem there. What is a ton of CO2? Most people don't know. But what people can relate to is relative measures. So in the scenario where you're socializing your carbon footprint, it's very easy to look and say, okay, I burned a ton of CO2, but Gavin burned half a ton of CO2. He's doing much better than me, however he's doing it. So, you know, in that situation, you've got a kind of a peer pressure or competitive pressure to drive down the output or the consumption.
We hear a lot about the generation and the consumption end, but of course, there's all the grids and switching in the middle. How is that different than a smart grid? You know, you've talked a lot about the challenges that traditional generation has when you need to do all this switching, but what about the stuff in the middle that connects the generation and consumption?
I'm sorry. The smart grid isn't just the smart meter. So the smart grid, basically there's communication throughout from the smart meter right back to the generation facilities, or right back to the grid operators who then communicate with the generation facilities.
I guess it's just that when I hear a lot about the smart grid, I never really hear about anything between that meter
What's in the middle there is the grid operators, what are called the ISOs.
Do what they do have to change under the new?
Yeah, massively. Because right now, the way a lot of the grid operators work is they work on what they call a D-1 system, where they look at what happened this day last year, this day 2 years ago, this day 3 years ago. So they look at the historic figures for tomorrow. And they plan their loads according to that. So they go to the generation facilities and say, tomorrow we expect to need X gigawatts. So we're going to set our price at Y cent per kilowatt hour. What do you want to be turned on at based on that? So they know the predicted demand for tomorrow, and then they start to generate a price based on that, and they ask people to bid in based on that. So that's not real time. When it goes to real time, it's a huge change for them. So they need to put a real-time market system in place so that supply and demand are talking to each other instantly. And they then start to even out the bumps in the grid and get the demand, get the supply to match up with the demand. So you're not getting those bumps.
Just to follow that up, is fixing that largely a technology problem, or is it more a business problem?
It's both. It's both, yeah. The technology is there. It just needs to be rolled out. So that's part of the 11 billion. And it's a business thing as well, in that the business processes and the business cases shift. So it's both, yeah.
Two questions. So the first one is, if everybody is arbitraging energy prices based on quantitative models, couldn't that cause like a Wall Street effect where everybody decides to buy and sell at the same time with wild fluctuations? The second thing is, we talked about exotic energy storage. Is anybody, I'm sure somebody is, but who's working on hydrogen, producing hydrogen from peak energy?
Hydrogen is one that is being worked on, to answer the second question first. Not hugely, though. There are a lot of solutions being tried out. The two I chose for storage are the ones that are most advanced, but there are a lot of other ones being looked at. The idea with hydrogen is that it's expensive to create hydrogen, but at times when you have an excess of energy, why not create it and be paid to do it if energy is negative? So be paid to create hydrogen and then burn it as a clean fuel afterwards when demand is high. So that's a good model. It is being worked on. It's not the most efficient, but it is another one that is being worked on, yeah. And the arbitrage and people gaming the system, if that's your question, I think, that could happen. Yeah, it could happen. All markets are open to abuse. It's the nature of markets. They have to be regulated. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. It's just something that we have to be aware can happen and try and minimize the likelihood.